and I were talking about this, I was saying I can go through this and give you everything, but the great thing is that we can also have a really good conversation together and kind of use the slides as a baseline because you can download everything after. I have like a full toolkit where you can get a recording of this, you can get all the slides, you can get additional resources that I've put together for you. So I want to be really clear about that because you get all of this and more. And so I think it'll be really special for us to make this into even more of like a conversation between me and Preeti and questions from you all in the chat. But to kind of introduce myself a little bit more, I'm Beth Santos. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Wanderful. And Wanderful is on a mission to help women, all women, travel the world. And we do that in a number of ways. We have a whole online, offline membership community of women who want to help support each other and give each other real helpful information about getting out there into the world. And we have chapters that before COVID met in person and now are just starting to ramp those up again in 50 cities around the world. And the thing that really differentiates us, I think, from a lot of other women's travel communities is that in addition to actually helping women, it's one thing to kind of like give women the tools to get out there. It's another thing to actually try to get the industry to do better at the same time. And we're going to talk a lot about that because I don't think it's up to women to just arm ourselves with pepper spray and send ourselves on our way. It's also about making sure that we're being appropriately represented, that we're being correctly spoken to, that the industry is serving our needs, and that's really important. So I'm really excited to talk about a topic that's super special to me. It's really the beginning of my own journey with Wanderful, started on one of my own solo trips. And Preeti, let me know, do you want me to dive into the slides or do you have anything else planned before I do that?
No, absolutely. Go for it. That should
Great.
be perfect. And yeah, I just want to say how, things are opening up now and people are thinking more about we've all lacked and missed, making new friends, bonding with our friends. And I think with things opening up now and people getting vaccinated, everyone is thinking already about, again, building their community, making new friends and traveling with others. And we thought this is a good time to speak about this. And yeah, I think with that, Beth, I'll let you take it over.
Well, I think that's such a good point, Preeti, because so first of all, solo travel has been a huge part of travel for a long time. But I think what's happened in the last 2 years, and there's, don't want to say quite studies, but like articles and media reports on the fact that solo travel is just going to be exploding over the next year even more because we've come off a place where we haven't really been traveling at all, and now we're kind of like, I don't need to wait for anybody else. I just want to go. Like I've got my bucket list place that I want to go to. I have the experience that I want to go on, and I don't need to wait for anybody. And the other thing that is a huge myth in the solo travel space is that you have to be single to do it, which you don't. I have a very happily married, I have 2 kids, and I love traveling by myself. And I think it's just a different type of travel and it's different and it's just a really special thing. And the other thing I want to do as we get started is just get a sense from you all of how much you've traveled alone before, because one thing that I think is really interesting is that sometimes in these workshops, actually a lot of times these workshops, I get a lot of people who are actually expert solo travelers and then other people that are just getting started. So I want to hear from you in the chat. Is this something that you've done before? Are you thinking about doing this? Kind of what step are you on this journey? Because then we can help you a little bit. And can you see the slides okay so far?
They look
Okay.
great, Beth. Yeah.
I am using a second screen, which makes me completely unable to use technology because I'm always like, what screen is happening now? So good. Oh, I like this. So we've got getting started, never traveled solo before. Used to travel alone when I was younger, but I'm getting more anxious the older I get for some reason. I've traveled solo for 20 years. That's awesome. So,
Wow.
and you know what I love about this is we can use this chat to help each other too. So if you have feedback, if you have thoughts, if you want to add something, do that. It doesn't have to be just me having this conversation and Preeti having this conversation. It can be all of you participating in this. So share your tips. But let me jump over here. I'm going to just monologue for the rest of this entire evening, and then you guys are going to go crazy. So, I already introduced myself. I'm a seasoned solo traveler. I'm also an entrepreneur. My mission is to help women travel the world. And I have all of my social handles at the bottom right corner of this screen. And you'll also see that's the link to the toolkit that I told you about. So, as I mentioned, everything I've done a pre-recording of this because I know I can talk fast and people are always like, wait, what was that thing on that slide thing? Blah, 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 help me. So that's ready to go. You can also catch this on Facebook, I know, because Adventure Tripper is recording this right now, so you can catch it on Facebook. But then the toolkit also has additional resources beyond what I'll recommend. So that's, you can find all that there. So let me give you a little bit of my story, and then we'll dive into the tips because I have a lot of them. So I started Wanderful when I was traveling alone in a country called Sao Tome and Principe, which is a two-island nation off the west coast of Africa. And it was an incredible and incredibly challenging experience. I'd never been to Sao Tome before. Most people I tell this story to also haven't been. It is a country of a population of about 200,000 people in the entire country now. It was 160,000 when I was there, with really no tourism industry. And when you show up in a place that doesn't have tourism, you really have to become live like a local very quickly. And it was living hyper locally in a place I'd never been to before that I really started to realize how different our travel experiences are as women when we go anywhere. And the thing is that it's always different from each other. There's different cultural norms that we have to adjust to. There's different expectations of us that we adjust to. And I wanted to find a way to help women navigate that. And so I started a blog. Now, Wanderful is a lot more than just our online content. We are a collective of thousands of travelers and also travel content creators that are here to make travel better for women everywhere. And we do that in a couple of ways. I mentioned this previously, our membership community and our local chapters. We have an incredible summit called the WITS Travel Creator and Brand Summit. So if you are a small business owner or a content creator in the travel space, you definitely want to check that out. We do it twice a year. And then a lot of advocacy and education to encourage the travel industry to be and do better, not just for women, but for people whose voices have traditionally been left out of the travel conversation, and making sure that that's part of it. Speaking of voices that have been left out, this is a picture of me in Chicago, actually, on WBEZ 91.5, their local public radio station. And I was on this show. This was in maybe 2015 or so. And I'm on this show, and the host, who's the host of this, the show is all about like worldliness, so like things going on in the world. And he sits me down and he says, "So, women in travel, huh? That's a really interesting niche." And I said to him, "Yeah." But what I should have said to him was, "Actually, sir, women in travel is not a niche at all. In fact, women dominate the travel industry by far. 80 to 85% of travel decisions are made by women. So you could arguably only speak to women and still take over most of the travel industry. 2/3 of travelers are female." And this is in 2019, so this is pre-pandemic, but search results for solo female travel actually grew 230% in 1 year. So before we even got to this place where now we're all thinking about traveling solo because we're just dying to get out there, it increased 230% in 2019 alone. So there's a huge place here, not just for women in travel, but also in the space of solo travel. Um, and as I and this is my favorite part. And in that, I'm just checking the comments too, just to make sure. But I know Preeti, you're going to be, and also Preeti, as you can see, I'm an expert monologuer. So anytime you want to jump in, you just
Yes,
let
and
me know.
I would just want to use this opportunity to say, if anyone has any questions, even as Beth is speaking, feel free to feed them through the comments, and I'll keep an eye out on the chat, and I'll keep feeding questions through to Beth. Also, I don't know, Beth probably mentioned this before, we will be sending out the slides after the event as well, in
Perfect.
case you've missed something. So yeah, of course, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel as well, but you'll get the slides and all the links and everything as well. So you can just, stay focused on what she's saying and feed your comments through.
Oh my gosh, we're going to take care of you. I think my biggest pet peeve is going to a webinar like this and it ends up just being like a sales pitch for the next part of the webinar. And you're like, I haven't learned anything. And so I'm going to give you so much information that you're going to be like overwhelmed, but it'll be a great thing. But yes, thank you, Preeti. And Holly has this great comment saying, I meet far more women when I travel. Usually they've left their husbands or boyfriends behind to do a girls trip or to travel solo, which I think is like a story that's not told very often, honestly. I think a lot of times we think solo travel and we think like single young women. We're going to talk about that too. And that's not the case. I mean, anybody can travel solo. And I honestly I think it's like a very nourishing thing for you to give time to yourself and to
And
get
it's
out there
getting
and do
more and
that.
more normalized. I remember earlier when
Yep.
I would hike by myself or travel by myself, the assumption would be that I'm single. They'd be like, they'll either be like, oh, were your husband or are you married? Do you have a boyfriend? I'm like, yes, I also have a kid. It doesn't mean I always have to.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to do a trip without my kid also. For
Oh
those
my
of
God,
you who have
seriously.
kids will hopefully relate. But
Yep.
yeah.
I have two children, and actually, it's one of my biggest pieces of advice for new parents is like go on a solo trip because I think things change when you have children or if you're a caregiver in general. Like you're focused so much on somebody else's health and happiness, and sometimes you forget to focus on yourself. And I honestly think that solo travel gives you a chance to reconnect with yourself in that way.
Yeah. And I don't want to interrupt more. This is the last comment I
I
promise,
know,
but I think it's
it's
so
okay. It's okay.
this is so important to mention because this really drives the point home for me. This summer, we ran a glacier walk trip, which is a cool trip. You get to walk on a glacier here in Washington, which most people are not
Oh my
aware
gosh, that's
of.
so neat.
And it wasn't by design, but guess what? All the 5 participants ended up being moms because COVID has been so stressful with parenting
Wow.
responsibilities and with having to provide for everybody, plus get your work done. It has been super stressful, particularly for moms, I feel like, and they
Yeah.
needed a let out. And all the 5 participants ended up being moms on that trip, and
Oh
they
my gosh.
absolutely rocked it. And I think Sangeeta from that trip has joined us
Sangeeta's like, that
today.
was the best trip
There you go.
ever.
There you go. Yeah, with that, back to you, Beth.
I love that. No, but it's so true, and I'm so glad to hear that happening more. I mean, honestly, I think that's so great, and I don't hear that story enough. And speaking of stories that you don't hear enough, I want to tell you the stories that we do hear when we talk about solo female travel. And so this is like my favorite slide because I think this basically sums up the two stories that we tell women about when they're thinking of traveling alone. The first story is the Eat, Pray, Love story, which is like Julia Roberts goes or Liz Gilbert goes and like has this magical adventure and like eats a ton of pasta and like meets a gorgeous Brazilian man and like goes off into the sunset with him. That's like story number one of solo female travel adventures. The second story is what I like to call the taken story, which is like you will be abducted and your family won't be able to find you. And then Liam Neeson is going to have to come and like save you, to help. And literally, these are the only two things we're told. Either it's going to be like this magical thing, or you're going to be killed or hurt, or Liam Neeson's going to have to look for you. And we all know that that's not actually true, that there are so many things that we need to and want to think about as women. And as I mentioned before, that those are all different wherever we go. And so, what I can't do is give you like every single piece of advice on what to do in every single place around the world. It's impossible. But what I can do is give you some of the tools so that you can help yourself along those processes. I think that's the best education that we can get is learning how to help ourselves, learning where to find the information that we need, and also learning what are some of the myths and biases that we're coming into these conversations with so that we can check ourselves at the door when we're planning these trips. So this is different from a traditional solo female travel workshop where it's like, here's the different brands of like pepper spray and whatever color changing nail polish and that kind of thing. This is what are the real tools that I need as a woman going out into the world by myself, whether it's for the first time or for the thousandth time, that can help me have a better experience across the board. So what you're going to see, myth busting, real tips. You've got the toolkit and courses. There's a special Wanderful membership offer in there because we want you in our community as well. And contemplated doing like a nice picture of an iceberg, and then I was like, that's way too overused, this whole iceberg thing. But it really is just the surface of all the things that can go over here. So, and this is my picture of Liam Neeson saying, "Let's begin." So here's something that I think Preeti's gonna love. These are like some of the top myths.
High five.
And
Actually,
for any of you who are hearing some of these things over and over again, I want to hear what some of your other myths are. Number one, the stories that we're told. Solo travel is dangerous, right? You're going to have like to protect yourself and you're not going to be able to stay safe. Solo travel is lonely. You're not going to be able to have any fun because nobody wants to eat in a restaurant by themselves. And you're not going to talk to anybody, which, by the way, and I forgot who it was that's been on like 20 years of solo travel, but I'm sure she can say that when you travel alone, sometimes it's the least lonely experience because you find yourself interacting with so many people more than you ever would have otherwise doing it with a group. Or so solo travel is lonely. Solo travel, this is one of my favorites, needs to be done on a mountaintop alone for months. You need to be like having some sort of, life-changing internal adventure with like 6 journals piled up, and like nobody can talk with you, and you have to be completely isolated. Like that's, what if you Google solo travel, that's usually what you're going to see is like a woman sitting on a mountain by herself with like some, beautiful look on her face. And then the other myth, which is that solo travel, when we look up those photos of who's traveling solo, usually it's a young, able bodied, white, Western woman who is going on this magical journey. And the reality is that that is only one very small category of who's actually getting out there. And the important thing is making sure that we're sharing messages that resonate not only with everyone, but that we're also sharing messages that resonate with people's unique identities and their unique realities.
I want to add here, Beth, and this is way back. This was 15, more than 15 years ago, when for the first time I was traveling abroad when I was in India. Deloitte was supposed to send me to the US, and they had a policy, I kid you not, that it's the Deloitte India office not to send women alone on a trip by themselves. For some reason, they thought I
Wow.
could handle it. So I was the first one. They just threw me. I came over to Manhattan, but they had a policy. It's also cultural. Like
Yeah.
traditionally, more like Indian women way back, things are absolutely changing, but did not travel by themselves. And like
Yes.
I said, a company like Deloitte had a policy of not sending women alone on international trips. So, but yeah,
Wow.
I had already done plenty right since the time I was 18. I was one of the very few women who was an auditor, and I used to travel across the country. So they ended up sending me. I was the first one, and then we started sending more people as well. I think Shikha, we go way back. I had met her for the first time. She's on the call, so happy to see her. She was with Deloitte as well, and then everybody started taking more trips. So it is a bit of it is also cultural as well. Whereas women in the Western world have been used to taking, the gap years right from a very young age. Something that Kirsten was referring to, how early days she
Yeah.
didn't care much about it, but she's now more aware and more anxious, perhaps. So yeah, I just wanted to
Yep.
pitch in with that.
No, I completely agree with that, and I've even really seen it in the Wonderful community as well. I was just having a conversation with Pam, who's our Mexico City chapter director, and she was saying similar stories to what you're telling me about India. She was saying, in Mexico City, like women are very much discouraged to even travel within their own country, alone, and it's not something that's really thought about very frequently versus there are places in the States where it's like, it's totally fine, anything go. I mean, and it's not country by country, it's city by city, it's neighborhood by neighborhood, and it's cultural. And so absolutely. And I think that's a huge takeaway here too, is and we'll actually bring this up as well, is kind of understanding what your own personal risk profile is and what the places that you're coming from and how that relates to the place that you're going to. Because all these are factors that play into that.
And it's so important to acknowledge that everybody is not coming from the same, baseline, and it's different for
Exactly.
everyone.
Yep, totally, totally. So let me give you some tips because this is the fun part. We're going to get into, there's 8 of them that I have, and I know there's like 1,000 more, and I'm already seeing that you guys are sharing them with each other in the chat. So keep sharing tips. Um, my first tip though is to actually completely redefine what solo travel means to you, because to this point of it needs to be on a mountaintop alone, without talking to everybody. For me, solo travel means you are in charge of your own adventure. That's literally all that it means. In that case, there are a number of different ways that you can have an amazing solo trip without actually traveling alone. And that's like one of my most favorite things to talk about. I actually speak on stage at a show called the Travel and Adventure Show. And I have this session called Secrets of Solo Travel. And the top secret is like, you don't actually have to travel alone to travel solo. And if you think about it, even if you are traveling alone, you're still surrounded by people. And so, what I often recommend for people who are kind of diving in for the first time is this concept of solo travel in a group, which is essentially a small group trip, but they're doing the planning for you, but you're navigating it in a small unit and you don't know anybody else on the trip anyway. So it's like whether you don't know anybody that you're meeting while traveling alone or whether you don't know anybody that you're traveling on this trip with, you're still on your own, right? Like you still don't know anyone. And so I think really thinking about different ways that you can actually travel solo without having to do everything. So that's a photo of one of our wonderful trips. I'm also going to make a list of some other great organizations to reach out to. Of course, Adventure Tripper is one of them too. But then also, I want to share some of my other favorites. Like, if you're thinking, I don't want to go on a group trip, I actually do want to travel by myself, but maybe I don't want to do the whole thing by myself. These are 2 of my favorite organizations. One is called VAWA, Vacation with an Artist. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. This is, it's essentially, um, you go for a few days or a few weeks and you apprentice with an artist in the world and you learn their craft with them. And sometimes you stay with them, sometimes you stay at a hotel down the street, but you essentially have an activity to do. And so you can plan your own trip, but then you can go and then meet up with somebody and learn their craft and then move on and do your next thing. So it's a really nice way to kind of dip your toes in. And then if you're very much like, I just want to completely do this all by myself, except maybe I don't want to eat by myself, let me introduce you to Eat With. Another company is Traveling Spoon that does the same thing. And it's essentially Airbnb for dinner. And what that means is people who are like, I have this really delicious recipe in my house that I want to make, but it only serves 12 people. So I need 11 people who will come to my house and eat dinner with me. And then you'll pay like $10 and you'll go to their house and you'll eat with them with a whole bunch of other travelers. And sometimes it's this super chef curated thing. And sometimes it's like my grandmother's bulgogi recipe that, I can't divide. And so I need people to eat it. And it's just like such a really exciting experience. To do that. And I'm seeing in the comments like, oh, if that's the definition of solo travel, then I've done a bunch. And you know what? That's great because I think that that's so great to notice that and to realize that because I will so many times say to people like, oh, have you traveled solo? And they'll go, well, not really. I mean, it's always for work. And it's like, so it doesn't count if it's related to work, or like, oh, I haven't, but I sort of did one time when, my friend dropped out and I went. So it's like, so your intention was to not go, but then you did, but like your discount, I think we often discount our travels and we think like, well, it wasn't like an actual solo trip, but there are so many different variations of how you can do this. I think as long as you are in control of your adventure, that's what a solo trip is. It's doing what in your heart you want to do and putting yourself out there. And by the way, for me, travel really only consists of 3 things. It consists of challenging your preconceptions, trying something new, and being comfortable with discomfort, putting yourself in a position of discomfort. So if you can do that over a weekend, 20 miles from your house, excellent. If you do that 1,000 miles away, excellent. It's really what you make of it and how much you're learning in the process. Okay. Oh, and then this is a great list of if you are interested in doing this solo travel for women, which is so hot right now. check out, this is a really good list. You have Adventure Tripper here, of course, which I know you guys have been doing some small group trips, which is awesome.
And we started now, Beth, because all the original idea was to start doing group trips internationally, but our timing was perfect right before COVID. And we canceled
Oh my
everything.
gosh.
And
Yeah.
all through COVID until this summer, we were only running trips, mostly private trips, which is families with their friends, COVID pods, extended families. We have restarted our group trips now. And guess what? We've already sold out. We've already successfully
That's
run a trip
awesome.
to Mount Hood, Columbia Gorge. We have one with Logan, I think is on the call in January. We just sold out an Everspace camp trip with Brooke, one of our ambassadors as well. So we have many lined up and many more in the works.
I love that. And I think you could probably make a killing just doing these trips for moms that are tired of being home with their kids after COVID, as per the 5 mom trip that you did recently. Sign me up for the next one.
But to be
Um,
honest, I've seen mixed groups really enjoying it and learning
that's
from
nice.
each other and really enjoying each other's company. So I'm a big fan of mixed groups as well.
I love that. I think that's great. Well, and so for those of you who are thinking about what that next trip is going to be, these are some really great organizations that can support you. I also put in our wonderful member trips because we do have a couple of trips from time to time that we do on our own. And then Intrepid is not a small business, but they've been doing this really interesting thing called women's expeditions, where they basically go to places and they really focus on supporting local women in the community. And they have like female tour guides in places where you're not often going to come across that. Iran is an example of one place that they'll go where you're kind of guided exclusively by women, and you're like experiencing kind of life through a woman's eyes in Iran, which I think is really different than a lot of travel companies do. And so I thought I'd bring that one up too, even though they're not necessarily like a small business. I think
Yeah.
they've got some really cool stuff that they're doing to
They're
support women.
fantastic. Yeah, they're absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic. And yeah, we look up to them, to be honest. And we
Yeah,
try to do
we do too.
stuff like that too, but keeping it sort of more within reach of most people as well is our big focus, to keep it accessible to as many people as possible. But they're doing a great job with all their female guides. And yes, we definitely look up to them.
I love that. I think it's such a good goal for a lot of us moving forward in that way. And I think that's what it is to really disrupt this narrative too. When we're talking about like women being 80 to 85% of travel, I mean, that's what it should be, right? Is like why is it seeing through women's eyes is like the new and unique thing, right? That should have been the old thing. It should be like seeing through men's eyes is the new and unique thing, but so it goes. So anyway, so yeah, so those are some, and then in the toolkit there is a even longer list of other places to check into. So check that out. Oh, and I recently read there now. Yes, I read this article too. I think it was in Condé Nast, maybe. There are a lot of women guides on the Inca Trail. Yes, there's been a big increase in guides, which has been really, really neat.
Guides, porters,
Porters
cooks,
and
the
cooks,
companies
there you
we work
go.
with, yeah, they have a pretty solid representation of women across the board.
I love it. I love that. I love that. Okay. Tip number 2. And this one leans into that question of safety, because I think in our wonderful community, we've done some research and we found that 40%, as many as 40% of our members have at one point opted out of a solo trip because either they were worried about their own safety or somebody else talked them out of it. A concerned friend, family member that said, I just don't want you to go. I don't feel like you're going to be safe. And what I realize is, like it or not, safety is a huge part of the solo travel conversation, and it's something that holds a lot of people back. But I also want to be realistic about how it affects people. And your safety level does depend a lot on your risk tolerance, your risk perception, and also who you are and where you're coming from. And so I wanted to create a list of questions for you to think about when you're thinking about safety, like, what are the local laws and regulations of this place? And especially now when we're talking about COVID, what are those COVID policies? But then also, if I am I coming to a place where part of my identity is illegal? Where I could be in danger because of how I identify or who I am or where I come from. Also, when you're looking at this, where is your data coming from? Are you looking at real scholarly sources, or are you just kind of pulling from a bunch of TripAdvisor reviews, which can be well-meaning but sometimes completely off? What is my own risk profile? How risky do I feel comfortable getting, kind of diving into something that I don't know? And also, where are you even coming from? I know a lot of people who will travel from Boston. They'll be like, oh, I'm really worried. I'm going to Portugal by myself. I use Portugal because my family's Portuguese. It's also extremely safe country. But we often think about other places as more dangerous than the places we're coming from. And oftentimes I'll respond to them and I'll be like, you're more likely to be robbed on our subway system, the T, than you probably are in Portugal. You're just thinking about it as, and it's something I don't know, and it's an outside experience for me, and it's more dangerous. But I think looking at the reality, and in fact, one could even argue that, because you live in the city that you live in, you're kind of looking at it from a little bit of like a blinded perspective because you're so used to things, you're not even thinking about your own security risks in your own city. And then finally, what resources do you have? Are there people on the ground that can help guide you? Do you know anybody who can give you some advice? I think sometimes just having access to locals is really important. But there is one thing that I want to add to this that I think is possibly the most important, and I am completely on a mission basically to like delete every single, and there's thousands of them, of those lists that are like top countries for women to travel solo. And there's reasons for that. First of all, they do really well because there are thousands of them. People are looking for this information. But also, there's a lot of things wrong with these lists. Like, number one, you can't rank a whole country as being, even though I just said Portugal is safe, you can't do that. You actually can't do that. You can't say one country is more safe than another country. There are areas of all places that are going to be more or less safe. Safety is not just physical. Sometimes it has to do with discrimination. Sometimes it has to do with legalities. It's not necessarily just about your physical security. Often these lists are really based on personal perspectives and biases. I once was invited to join a survey for a solo female travel community, and we were supposed to rank places based on how safe we felt walking in the street at night in those places. And there were so many things wrong with that. First of all, being that when the level of safety that you feel walking around in a place also has a lot to do with your perceptions and biases of the place that you're in, right? And what you perceive as safe or not. The other thing that happens, I think, a lot is you're not taking into account who is being asked that question. Is it a white person that's being asked that question? Is it a black person? Is it somebody else? Like, where has their what is their background that has caused them to feel this way? Because certain people feel very differently in places than other people do. And what I've found is that oftentimes the predominant group that's being pulled on these things is white people. And so you'll see a lot of these lists that will say, oh, well, we rank this place higher if it's English speaking versus this other place. And I'm like, well, what if you don't speak English? Obviously, that place is not going to be safer for you. So really thinking about where is that data coming from, who's being pulled, should you follow anything where somebody's getting pulled? No. And just keeping in mind where that's all coming from. That's why I actually think that you should pretty much abandon these lists when possible entirely. All right, let's dive into some other stuff. Even though we did just talk about safety and how you really need to think about those things for yourself, I will also say that it is a complete reality that your family may be concerned, and it's a complete reality that you might be concerned. You're going into a new place. You don't necessarily know what you're walking into. It is okay to set your loved ones at ease, and these are some really good tips on how to do it. Getting an international data plan, getting a local SIM card, having a phone on you, that works. Registering with your local embassy so that people know you're there. Know the facts and realities about where you're going. Have up-to-date information. On a past webinar, somebody mentioned to me, being aware of possible political unrest. There are some great tools. We used to use Global Rescue. There's a lot more out there that do things like that now, where they'll give you a full scope of what the reality is like on the ground where you're going. I'm sure there's plenty in the adventure community as well. sure you can think of a million
Yes,
off the
I
top
want
of your
to
head.
add, especially, the kind of stuff we do. Of course, we do all kinds of trips which don't have to be extreme adventure, but for,
Mm,
say, something like climbing Kilimanjaro or Machu Picchu, or even some of the trips that we do here in Washington, where you're in the wilderness and you do not have phone connectivity, we always suggest having like a satellite device, or somebody in the
mm,
group should have a satellite device as well, because it always makes a huge difference if you're on a multi-day trip where you're not going to be able to get connected. It
yeah,
really is very reassuring for, like my husband feels a lot more comfortable when he knows I have the satellite device on me. He can track where I am, and he
yeah.
knows that I can press SOS. And, if something goes wrong, I will have access to emergency services. So that makes a
Well,
huge difference.
yeah, and I think that's super valuable, and I think back in my, I think it was Kristen that had mentioned like feeling so much freer when we were younger, and kind of as we get older, knowing the reality of things, and that makes us a little bit more nervous. And I remember being in my early 20s and being like, I love being off the grid. I don't want anybody to know where I am, and this is great. But now it's like I think about this not even for my own safety, but in the sense of if something did happen to me, I want to make sure I'm not adding undue stress to my family and friends and people who are trying to find me, right? I want to make it as easy for them as possible to do things in that event. And so even I had a question in a on a different day from somebody who was saying like, well, what if I don't necessarily know where I'm going? And I said, as much information as you can provide within reason. Oftentimes when we plan a trip, we like to plan, where we're going to stay, even if it's just like a couple of the hotels along the way, or, key flights that you have, whatever you do have, pass it along. And if you're making that information up as you go, find a way to send it back so that then there's somebody who can kind of track you securely. I know people who will create, Google Docs that they'll just kind of keep updated for family and friends to keep in mind, to keep in touch with them. And the other thing, this last piece of advice was actually given to me by a social worker who said, in not that we want to expect or plan for traumatic situations, but in an event of trauma, if something does happen to you, it's really, really hard to think logically in those moments. And if you give yourself just a few moments before you leave on your trip, just to think through, okay, if there were an emergency, who would be the first person I would call? Do I have their phone number? Do I have, a way to call them if I need to? And just kind of going through that process before you depart, it will make it 1,000 times easier for you if you do have an emergency to think, okay, I've already thought through this. I have the phone, I have the number written down somewhere because Lord knows I'm not going to remember the phone number I need to call. I know who I'm going to call. So just giving yourself that 30 seconds of planning time before your trip is a gift for you later if you do need it.
And we absolutely always do that for backcountry trips. But another thing I would add, Beth, what we also always do is almost always, even if it's like a day hike, I always make it a point to let somebody, whether it's my husband or somebody else back, or back home, who knows where I'm going. I leave the details of where I'm
Mhm.
going to be, what my plan is, how long I'm going to be gone for, by when they should expect me back. And if I'm not back by a certain time, that's when, there's always an action plan, particularly when I'm in the backcountry, that if I'm
Yeah.
overdue by this time, this is who you need to call.
Yep. And I think even more so important when you are backcountry or you're hiking by yourself, as you all know, experienced adventure travelers, I think it's even more important that somebody knows to take action when they need to take action. But absolutely, just having that information. The other thing that was brought up to me, which I think is gold, is make sure you know what the emergency number is if you're in a different country. Because sometimes we just automatically think we're going to call 911 and then we get there and we're like, oh God,
Um,
it's not 911 here.
big one.
Like, what do
Yeah.
you do? So, and there are great apps. There's a whole list of safety apps that are in this toolkit that you can take a look at too. Some of the ones that, kind of like what you were saying, Preeti, it'll be like, you say what time you expect to be finished with whatever excursion you're on. And if you don't turn it off by that time, it will like automatically send a message out to your contacts and say, hey, I didn't return at the time I said I would, and let them know. So there's some really nice ones too that more actively or more passively alert your family and friends. Okay, tip number 4, and I know I'll speed these up a little bit because we're at 4 and we've got 8. Where you stay is just as important as where you go. And this is something I really believe very strongly. So I have 4 kind of different places that you might stay. I did not include things like a tent, a hut, where else could you stay? A lean-to. My dad just stayed at a lean-to last week. I was like, wow, I haven't done that before. That's exciting. Um, but this is kind of some of the more traditional travel stuff: a hotel, a hostel, a vacation rental, a Wanderful homestay, which is our kind of fun little homestay experience for Wanderful members. You can actually stay with other women. And if you're staying at a hotel or hostel, those are spaces where you do have a little bit more of that. Of somebody who's in control of your experience. So you can ask for, oftentimes we say, ask for a third floor room if there is a third floor, because it's harder to get up from the outside but easy to get down from the inside, or outside too. Um, bring a lock when you're staying at a hostel. Get to know your hostel staff or your concierge. Just make sure that somebody knows your face, has talked to you before, so that even if you're going out by yourself, say, hey, I'm going for a walk, I'll be back in 20 minutes, just so that they have an idea. I think that's a great way to make sure that somebody's up to speed while you're going out and about by yourself as well. Yes, Holly said a lot of hotels are making it policy to not say room numbers out loud. If they do say your room number out loud, you have the right to ask for a different room for your safety. So keeping that in mind too, usually they'll just pass it to you on a little card. I think smaller facilities can be great ways to meet people. So even if you do want like a hotel experience, maybe you want to stay at a bed and breakfast or an inn, where you're going to meet the owners who are local and can give you some advice. Hostels are something that I think people tend to shy away from if they're not in college, but actually are incredible spaces that a lot of them are open to anyone of any age. And a lot of them now have like private rooms with ensuite bathrooms. And the benefit of a hostel is that they also do programming. So you could stay by yourself in a room, but then you can latch on to a group and go out for a walking tour or, excursion somewhere and get to meet other people at the same time.
Sandemans. I always did that. Spain, wherever I was in Europe, I just went on a Sandeman tour. And what I loved
Yes.
about them is that I don't know if you have Sandemans here, Beth. I
I
haven't
don't
come
know if
across.
we do in the US, but I know of them. Yep,
Yeah,
I've been
because
on one.
there would always be so many people. It's not like it's just going to be you
It's
with
a
some
huge
random
group.
person. There's
Hmm.
always like so many people. So it always felt safe to just go out with them, explore, get like the lay of the land. And then I would plan what am I going to do on the following days based on that first day's initial tour, which is your day zero.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And going and getting a sense for it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too, of like making sure that you're getting a sense of your surroundings is such a critical part. And this is just some quick info on the vacation rental space, which is honestly one of my personal favorites. I think it's such a great way to get to know local hosts and to kind of see how somebody else lives in another place. There are a couple of tips in here, like there are still vacation rentals where they'll rent out the whole facility to guests, and then there will be nobody who actually lives there on site. It'll be like kind of like a glorified dorm, and probably want to avoid that. Have your address written down in a local language. That's really key, especially if it is a private residence, because the taxi driver or whoever's trying to give you directions might not know where the place is. But also I wanted to give you a couple of specific tips here of 2 really great women focused, women owned companies that are coming out that are vacation rentals and homestays for women, pretty much exclusively. So there's Fem B&B and there's Go Lightly, and you can think of them as like the Airbnb for women, but those have properties all over the world. and can be a really nice option. They've been doing some really neat security verification, like Go Lightly will do, you have to be invited by somebody else, I think, to participate. So it's kind of like a, who knows who. And then FemB&B, they've actually been doing, they were just telling me this, like some biometric verification. And there's, of course, like a driver's license upload and that sort of thing so that they're sure of who you are when you're signing up. So they're definitely taking a little bit more into account in terms of safety, knowing that women and often solo women are using their platforms.
That is so neat because when I started doing
Hmm.
solo travel like 15, 17 years ago, I actually wouldn't. And there weren't that many air vacation rentals or
Yeah.
B&Bs. My preference was always like bigger chain hotels because I felt
Yep.
safer in
Yep.
those. Yeah, but things are changing. It's very different now, and these are such cool ideas.
Yeah, and I know in some places too, I actually think India has a lot of them, like women only floors in hotels
Yeah.
is something that you can find in certain countries, which, you know, pros and cons depending on like what you want your experience to be like, but that can be an option too if you're feeling like you're really not sure where you are and you want to have that extra level of safety.
Yeah, and totally depends on where you are as well. Like I'd be totally fine in hostels in across Europe, right? Because yeah, so it depends
Right.
on where you are as well and what your comfort level is as well.
Yep.
But yeah,
Totally, totally. So this is something that Preeti was just quickly mentioning as I get a little bit more comfortable in my seat, is this concept of taking a day zero, which I think is a really important concept when you're traveling by yourself, because let me kind of, paint this picture for you. When you're traveling alone, many wonderful things happen, right? The experience is yours. You get to be the one who's absorbing everything. You get to be the one who's deciding what you want to do. But also, there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of extra effort on top of that, right? Like, you have to be the one talking to everybody. You can't like take a step back, you know? You have to be the one figuring out the directions. You have to be the one carrying everything. And it's not a burden per se. I mean, I think it's still a great thing to do, but it's something you have to think about. And so, one thing that I really recommend when you're traveling solo is to give yourself what I like to call a day zero, which for some people they're like, I'm only going to take a morning to do this. Fine, take a half day. Or I would recommend taking a full day and literally just get to know your area. Take a walk, notice the landmarks, learn the bus or train system, see how people use things. I often think about like locating where the nearest supermarket or grocery store or market is, because sometimes when you're trying to see everything and really be a traveler or be a tourist, you are just so focused on getting to that next place that sometimes you miss some of those efficiencies of noticing like, oh, there's actually a grocery store across the street from where I am, or oh, I can purchase a token to get on the bus over here and I can file that information away and use it later. And because you're by yourself, you don't have anyone else who's going to notice those things for you and be like, oh, by the way, I saw this. So giving yourself some time to actually just watch people, sit in a cafe, people watch, take a little walk. And I put Sandemann's right on that list as well. There's a few
yeah.
other walking tours here too. But just even taking a walking tour that first day and letting somebody else guide you. And the thing that's really great about those walking tours too is you're literally walking next to somebody who lives there, who can, not just answer your questions about what style of architecture that building is, but also like, what is the exchange rate here? Like, how much is it for a cup of coffee here? Or like, what language are you speaking? Whatever question you have, you could ask somebody right there and get that on your first day and have it helpful for you.
Yeah, Tours by Locals Canada. Yes, Canadian company.
I did not know that. They're a Canadian
Yeah,
company? Oh,
Toronto
that's
based.
cool. Oh,
They're
that's
all over the
awesome.
place, but they're Toronto based. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, tours by local is great. Walks is really great. Even Airbnb experiences. Context, I think, is really interesting because they focus on I use this in a lovingly way, like nerdy travel. They literally will pair you up with like a PhD of whatever topic you want to learn, and they'll customize these trips. So if you want to like treat yourself and spend a little bit of money and you would like geek out about something, you can actually hire like a context tour guide to give you like this super specific and super rich tour about like a number of topics. So I think that's kind of cool too. Okay, tip number six. This one we've touched base on a little bit, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but being considerate of local cultures and customs and recognizing that every place is going to be a little bit different. So thinking about this in this context, I'm talking about it in terms of dress, at least for this slide. One of my most favorite things to bring as a solo woman traveler is a scarf. I use my scarf for everything. It can be a headscarf if you need coverage. It can cover your shoulders. It can cover your legs. It can be a blanket. It can be a blanket that you sit on for a picnic. It can be any number of wonderful things. And I think having something that can have multiple uses like that will be so helpful to you. I have told a story before about when I, a few years ago, traveled on my own to Turkey and was spending most of my time in Istanbul and literally Googled, like, what to wear in Istanbul. And, the things I read were like, oh, it's a very, modern place where you can basically wear anything. What I didn't Google was what to dress in Mardin, which is a small town in the southeast of Turkey. And I showed up there with basically like a strappy dress that was showing my knees. And I swear I was the most embarrassed person in the whole. And I say this because I think sometimes people are like, oh, you should dress how you feel and, whatever, who cares how else they feel? That's their problem, not yours. But it becomes your problem when you feel that uncomfortable and you're making other people uncomfortable too. And it's when you're traveling, it's not just about how you are taking in somebody else's culture. It's also about your presence there and the impact that you're having in a community. So just being thoughtful about that and making sure that you have a backup. Some of my other favorite backups are like maxi dresses and skirts, which can be super comfortable, great for curling up on a plane or wherever you are, but also give you coverage, layers, just being really thoughtful about how you're presenting yourself so that you're not in a position where you're regretting something later.
I was laughing away when you mentioned Turkey, Beth, because exactly same thing happened to me when I
Oh
was
my
in
God.
Turkey. And again, and you made such a good point about respecting others' cultures, because again, I'd read the same thing, modern clothes, I was in my jeans and t-shirts everywhere, but it was a little chilly, so I had my stole, and this is terminology, you probably call it the
Mm,
scarf, I call it the stole, so it's slightly longer,
hmm. Yep.
right? And it was in Turkey, it's in Istanbul itself, but Hagia Sophia, because the mosque, you can
Yep.
go in if your legs are not covered,
Yes.
and that's
Right.
when the stole came in handy, and I used it as a wraparound skirt because you want to
Good.
respect their culture, right? So
Right.
such a great point. And same thing happened to me in
Oh my
Turkey.
gosh,
What are
that's
the
so
odds?
funny. Yep, exactly. Well, and I mean, it could happen anywhere, right? If you go to Vatican City, I think you have to have your shoulders covered. I'm trying to think if you had to have your head covered, but definitely your shoulders. And there are always
Yes.
moments where you're going to be caught off guard. And Stacy asked a great question. What shoes do you
Please.
suggest? Comfort, comfort, comfort.
Yes.
Like, it, just focus on that. You do not need to have anything stylish. Probably closed-toed shoes are best just across the board. Anything that you can walk long amounts of time, and do not wear brand new shoes and get your feet all, ruined. There are also some really good, one thing that I love is they have a lot of them now. They're like little foldable ballet flats that fit into a little pack. And if you're trying to travel really, really light, sometimes I like to bring a pair of these in case for whatever reason something does happen to my footwear or my feet are really uncomfortable. You can pull these out and just stick them on your feet and get wherever you need to go so that and you don't have to worry about if a strap on your sandal breaks or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
And talking about
yeah.
sandals and closed-toed, I'd say because I end up doing hiking most of the places I go,
Hmm.
but places which are more tropical and really warm, I prefer sandals, but again, closed-toed sandals. And there's so many
Yeah,
strappy
with
and
the little,
stylish looking ones. I stick with my Keens because you have the closed
yeah,
toe and I can just hike in them as well. And yeah, I think someone mentioned Dr. Scholl's. They're a great
yeah.
option as well. Yeah, Stacy, thank you.
I'm like literally clicking this link right now and I'm like, wait, no, I'm giving a presentation. I can't look at this. But yes, absolutely. No, I think that those are great. And yeah, Keen is excellent. I honestly, I will, I know people who have like shoe fetishes and will bring so many shoes. And I literally bring like two pairs of shoes when I travel, and I bring the most basic that can go with everything. That's one thing that I'll share with you in terms of packing tips, which is actually the next tip in here. Actually, well, I'll give it a second, but it's just to capsule your wardrobe, which is have everything match. Don't have like, things that are can only be worn one time. Reusable things, things that can pack well, things that are comfortable. Your comfort is the most important thing. And speaking of comfort, you're not going to change 1,000 years of culture in 1 week. So there are going to be moments where you might feel comfortable because of the culture that you've entered into or the way somebody speaks to you. And, barring any serious situations, I think it's also really important for us to recognize our role as the fact that we are visitors and we're only in a place for a short period of time. And to think that we can completely change somebody else's culture by insisting on our way or criticizing somebody else, I think that can be very irresponsible. And to keep that in mind, it doesn't just have to do with dress, it also has to do with coming into a place as a learner. And I think that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, because sometimes we fundamentally disagree with something that somebody's saying, but also keeping in mind that you're only there for a short period of time. So unless you decide you want to dedicate your life to changing something, there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do in those moments. Let's talk about packing, because these are some of my favorite things. So I mentioned this capsule wardrobe, which is the concept of a capsule wardrobe is basically packing things that all match each other so that you can mix and match things easily. And that's why I'm saying two pairs of shoes that are comfortable, that can be used in different ways. I'll bring just like, yeah, I think like Keen is a really good example, or some of those like kind of super, I'm trying to think of like Merrell's has some really good ones too, that are kind of like a little bit nondescript so they can sort of go with everything. Um, and that's kind of what I would recommend. And then also that means you don't have to pack as much, because everything can be mixed and matched, or you can even wash things in your hotel room sink if you need to. I've done that plenty of times. Packing cubes are like literally my most favorite thing ever. And oh, we are going to go over a little bit, ladies. I will speed this up. Packing cubes are my most favorite thing ever. They will make everything fit beautifully. Function over fashion. This is actually a backpack from Red Ox, and I think it could actually work really well in the outdoors too. It was created by a founder who was former military and found that all of his military gear was super well made, but then all the other stuff was not. And he hated it. And so he created his own luggage company called Red Ox, Redoxx. That's like military grade luggage with like big old zippers and canvas and all sorts of stuff. So I think you're going to be toting your stuff around. You're going to be the only person carrying stuff. So you need something that's going to work for you. Um, and by the way, prescription meds, birth control, there's actually lists out there of places where you can get birth control over the counter versus if you need a prescription that you should look for. A menstrual cup, period panties. These are all some fun things that a number of companies have now. It's not just like Thinx and Diva Cup, but a lot have that. Then let me share with you this other thing. If you don't want to be lugging your luggage around, these are my favorite. I feel like I say this all the time, but these are also really truly my favorite. Luggage Hero and Verto. This is more like the city travel experience, but this is basically Airbnb for your luggage. So these are small businesses that will take your luggage for $1 or $2 per hour and will store it for you so that you can go about your day and like go to the museum and not have to bring all your stuff with you. So if you are interested in this idea of not carrying your luggage around all the time on a day trip, check out Luggage Hero and Verto. Those are really great companies to look into. And finally, oh, and then some of my favorite gadgets, there's a whole list that I'll give you. The travel bra, you can stick your passport in. The Where is Public Toilet app, brilliant. My Pill, which is a birth control reminder that is super time zone friendly. Waypoint Goods has like a infinity travel scarf with a pocket in it as well. And again, all of that is in the toolkit, so you can see that. There's also some other gadgets that you can use. And then tip number 8, and this is it, this is the end. Your best asset is people who live in the place that you're going to. So finding ways to connect with people who are from that place, who can give you advice before, during, and after. Wanderful, of course, I'm going to recommend up and down. We have thousands of women in our community who can help you with everything from what to pack in a place to how to use the bus system to what kind of coffee you should order to just having somebody to meet up with for dinner. There's other good ones, No Madness, Latinos Who Travel, Nomadic Network, and then also Facebook groups. We have a great Facebook group called Wanderful Women Who Travel that can help each other out. We have a big festival that we're planning in March of 2022 that I haven't told you all about. It's called Wanderfest. It's in downtown New Orleans. We're doing a parade and inspiring speakers and music and a woman-owned marketplace and for shopping and all sorts of really fun stuff. And you can meet people and find your next travel buddy, and then you don't have to go solo if you don't want to. So definitely check that out, connect with people, talk to people. But when you're by yourself, honestly, you will make so many great connections just with the people that you meet in the hostel and on the walking tour and at the museum. And it'll just be an amazing, amazing adventure. So this is what's in the toolkit: the slides, recording, a gadget list, a list of reading to do that we would recommend, a directory of women-owned travel companies, some freebies that we have, like a summit that we did last year called the Wonderful Women Summit, a travel blogging course, a special member deal, all of that. This is the URL. And that's it. That's like your whole package of everything you could possibly know about getting out there into the world. But I will say, if you haven't been on a solo journey yet, I'm so excited to hear about where you go. If you have, I hope that I've given you some things to think about that have kind of changed your perspective a little bit or given you some tools. But I'm just so grateful to have been able to chat with you all. And Preeti, thank you so much for letting me be here and to talk with you all and sharing your thoughts too, because I know you're such an avid solo traveler yourself.
No, it's amazing, Beth. And one of the best things that happened running, the travel started the past 2 years or so, when I came across you guys and your amazing community, it was just so awesome. And I didn't even know, the way I found out was somebody nominated us for the travel award on
Right.
Wonderful. And then we got shortlisted and we won the travel startup of the year at Glacier,
Yes.
which was absolutely incredible. And that's when I became aware of the incredible community that you have. And I know we're a little late to the game, but we're absolutely going to make it for your New Orleans Wonderfest, right? So anyone
Yay!
wants to come with us from Seattle, let's go together. Let me know. We'll be there.
I love it. And Preeti also mentioned, which I forgot to mention earlier, I mentioned we have chapters all around the world. We used to have a chapter in Seattle, and we also used to have a chapter in Portland, and both of those chapter directors moved. And so we are looking for new leadership. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you want to be a leader of a community of women travelers, they host monthly events to just connect women who love to travel nearby. We're always looking for new talent there as well as other places around the world. So come just visit us at sheswanderful.com. I'm just going to put it in the chat right now, /chapters. And right at the bottom of the page, that has the list of all of the chapters that we have. And at the bottom, there's information on how to be a director. So check it out.
Absolutely. Highly recommend.
Great.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been such a pleasure, and I hope that you get all sorts of good stuff out of it. And I can't wait to hear where everyone's adventures take them in this next year.
Beth, you're such a rock star. Thank you so much. And I was like, I don't even need to look at the questions. I don't know how many screens. You said you're one screen. You're on the chat. You're typing away. You're just so good at this. All the tips and all the information.
Absolutely. Thank
Wonderful.
you, Preeti, for having me and Kirsten as well. It's been great, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Yeah. Thanks everyone so much for joining us, and see you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.